Just when I thought I may have been getting both protest and COVID fatigue, I turned to this week's Torah portion for a respite from today's reality. Instead, as I read through this week's Parashat Korach, I found a story dedicated to describing numerous rebellions and uprisings against Moses and Aaron. The uprisings, led at first by Korach and 2 other men, were then followed by the whole Israelite community, challenging the authority of Moses and Aaron and their supposed divine chosenness. All of the Israelites are holy, Korach argues. In a nutshell, Korach's rallying cry, simply put, is power to the people. In the midst of the Israelite community's rebellions and protests, God sends down a plague. So not only were the rebellious Israelites being attacked by earthquakes and fire, but God decided to throw a plague into the mix, which the Torah relates killed 14,700 Israelites. Of course, mention of the plague and uprisings in this week's Parsha remind me of what is happening right now in our own communities. So what did God think of Korach's power to the people battle cry? God sets the stage for his reaction by ordering those against Moses to set up fire pans outside the tent of meeting. Moses then decrees that if Korach and his fellow protesters are in the right, then nothing will happen to them. But if Moses is indeed God's chosen leader, then something supernatural will happen to prove Moses' case. No sooner is Moses finished speaking when the ground under the rebels burst open and swallowed them all alive. And God, in addition to the earthquake, sends a fire consuming the fellow protesters, offering the incense in the fire pans. God's destructive actions here are meant to prove a point. God firmly supports Moses as his earthly leader and shows in no uncertain terms that he is against Korach and everyone else who dares to question Moses and Aaron. The piece of the story that has given me a new perspective is when right after God puts an end to the rebellion, while the ground is still smoldering with charred remains, God orders Moses to collect the rebels' fire pans, the symbol of their rebellion, and hammer them down into metal sheets that will then be used as plating and decoration for the sacred altar. The Torah explains, for they have become holy because they were offered before the Lord, that they may be a sign unto the children of Israel. Vayikdashu vayiyu leot livnei Israel. The protest itself has now become holy. These verses in Torah reminded me of an article I recently read about whether or not to tear down the now charred out and destroyed Minneapolis 3rd Precinct Police Station, the focal point of the protests, which began exactly 1 month ago this week. After studying this week's Torah portion, I now have the ability to look at aspects of even the more violent protests in different light. The idea that something that began as catastrophic and destructive can be transformed into something that is holy and stand as a sign and a monument. During the past month, we have seen corporations and all manner of organizations reach out to their employees and their communities in an effort to listen, to learn, and to find ways to bridge the racial divide so that we can understand one another. Now we know how God felt about Korach's protest, but I wanted to find out what the Kotzker Rebbe had to say. By now, you all know how much I love quoting the Kotzker Rebbe, right? I thought for sure that I wouldn't be able to find any relatable words of wisdom from him on the topic of equality. But I found some words by Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, an Orthodox rabbi, who writes, the Kotzker Rebbe gave Korach the nickname, the Holy Grandfather, because he used the democratic argument of equality in holiness against Moses and Aaron. Speaking to them, Korach says, it has been enough leadership for you. All the people in the witness community are holy with the Lord in their midst. Why must you set yourselves up to be on a higher plane than the congregation of the Lord? I can't help but wonder whether or not we will ultimately find holiness in the remnants of all that we have witnessed these past months of pandemic and protests for justice. Hopefully we will see more than burned out buildings to remind us of injustice, and instead put into place real legislative change as a sign for all time. I leave you on this beautiful and holy Shabbat with the words of Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. May we, the Jewish community and the Black community, continue to rise together as we make our community a holy and equal place. You will hear this plea in our final song tonight. Why can't we live together? Shabbat Shalom u'mevorach.